Hey everybody, it's Ron. Every Monday through Thursday, we talk about how some event in business history reshaped the world. But on Fridays, we talk about something completely different. These are the stories that went completely off the rails. They may have still changed the business world, just not in the way anyone wanted. These are the business bloopers. It's 1983. And somewhere in a grocery store in Dallas, Texas, two young Pepsi employees are having the best Tuesday of their lives. They're maybe a year or two out of college, and they've landed what feels like the greatest entry-level marketing job in America. Every morning, they set up a folding table near the soda aisle in a different grocery store. They lay out two small paper cups and ask strangers a single question. Which one tastes better? One cup is labeled M, one cup is labeled Q. That's it. No logos, no colors, no swishes, no polar bears, no Santa Claus. Just two sips of cola and a choice. The shoppers don't know which cup is which, but the two young Pepsi reps behind the table know exactly which cup is which. And all day long, people are choosing M. Not every single person, but enough, more than enough. The young man scribbles another tally mark on his clipboard and glances over at his partner, who is already pressing her lips together trying not to grin. They've been doing this for weeks. The number keeps coming back the same way. M wins. M almost always wins. And M is Pepsi. They don't make a big show of it at the table, but on the drive home they do. Because what they are holding on that clipboard is not just a snack food preference, it's evidence, it's ammunition. It's the kind of data that ends up in a television commercial, which it already has, which is kind of the whole point. You see, what's called the Pepsi Challenge has been running since 1975. 8 years of folding tables and paper cups and strangers choosing M. At its peak, Pepsi's running 400,000 of these tests every year across grocery stores, shopping malls, and college campuses. And the numbers, they keep holding. Now, let's cut to a different room. A different city, a different building. No folding table this time, just a long conference table and fluorescent lights and a stack of clipboards that nobody seems particularly eager to pick up. The setup is almost identical, though. Two unmarked cups, a volunteer, a sip, a choice, an observer with a pen watching, writing down what happens. The volunteer takes a sip from the first cup, pauses, takes a sip from the second cup, sets it down, and points at the one that they like better. The observer writes it down and thanks them. The volunteer leaves. Another one comes in. More cups, more sips, same choice. And then another and another. The observer keeps writing. The stack of results keep growing. And the number that is emerging from that stack is the same number that has been making the two young Pepsi employees in Dallas grin at each other across a folding table for the better part of a decade. Except nobody in this room is grinning. Because this isn't a Pepsi conference room. This is Atlanta. And the people watching these results come in work for Coca-Cola. Okay, so how did we get here? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business Bloopers, the weekly podcast where we unpack the business decisions that sounded smart until they weren't. Every Friday, I'll take you through a real story where something went off the rails. Sometimes it's hilarious, sometimes it's painful, but always it's a reminder that even smart people screw up in business. And we'll look at why it matters. This is Business Bloopers. Before we get into this one, I want to set something up. This is probably the most well-known story we will ever cover on this show. We're talking about New Coke. Most people have heard of it. Most people think they know what happened. And honestly, most people are right about the basic facts. The what of this story isn't really in dispute. The why, on the other hand, has never been settled. Not officially, not even close. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to walk through the what first, completely and carefully, including some details that don't show up in the headline version. And as we go, I want you to hold on to those details. Because by the time we get to the end, you're going to have everything you need to form your own opinion about the why. And I'll warn you right now, the why has more than one reasonable answer. Here's something most people agree on. By the early 1980s, Coca-Cola was in trouble. Not obvious trouble, not the kind of trouble that shows up in headlines. The quiet kind, where the numbers move in the wrong direction so slowly you can almost convince yourself they aren't moving at all. After World War II, Coca-Cola held roughly 60% of the cola market. By 1983, that number had been sliding for 15 consecutive years. Pepsi's market share had climbed from 23% in 1975 to nearly 32% by 1984. On the other hand, Coke's had dropped from over 60% to under 40%. The gap between the two was closing, and everyone in Atlanta, where Coca-Cola is famously headquartered, knew it. Something called the Pepsi Challenge was a big part of the why. Those folding tables and paper cups with fresh young Pepsi reps had been showing up in grocery stores and shopping malls since 1975, and the commercials that followed were landing pretty hard with the public. Pepsi wasn't just winning sip tests, they were winning them on television, in front of millions of people, using Coca-Cola's own customers as the proof. And when Coca-Cola's internal research team ran their own blind test to check, the results came back the same way. Pepsi was winning. Not always, not by a landslide, but consistently enough to matter. Now, here is the first thing worth filing away. A man by the name of Malcolm Gladwell, who's a highly influential British-Canadian author, journalist, and public speaker, would later point out in his book Blink that the sip test is fundamentally flawed. In a single sip, the human palate naturally gravitates towards sweetness. Pepsi is the sweeter drink. So Pepsi was essentially designed to win a sip test, the same way a sprinter is designed to win a 50-yard dash. Change the distance, and the result might change too. Coca-Cola's own at-home test, where participants drank full cans rather than single sips, consistently showed people preferred Coke. That data existed, it was noted, and then it was set aside. Robert Goizueta, Coca-Cola's Cuban-born CEO, was a chemical engineer by training. He had taken over the entire company in 1981 and had already made two big swings that paid off. First, he quietly switched Coca-Cola's sweetener from cane sugar to high-fructose corn syrup, which was a cost-cutting move that went largely unnoticed by the public. Then, a little bit later, he launched Diet Coke, which had a sweeter flavor profile than original Coke and became one of the most successful product launches in beverage history. To Goizueta, the data was telling a clear story. Sweetness sold. So in his mind, the original Coke formula was the problem, and problems in his experience had solutions. So Goizueta and Coca-Cola spent 2 years and $4 million developing a new flavor formula. They tested nearly 200,000 people across the country in controlled sessions, blind taste tests, focus groups, and written surveys. The new formula, smoother, sweeter, closer to what people kept choosing in the Pepsi test, beat both original Coke and Pepsi consistently. The number came back the same way almost every time. There was one thing the test generally did not tell participants, though. The participants weren't clearly informed that the original formula Coke would be discontinued entirely, not joined by something new, replaced, gone. Remember, they had recently launched the new Diet Coke. The question being asked was, do you like this taste? The question that actually mattered was never asked at all. But the taste test said what they said, and on April 22, 1985, Goizueta and Coca-Cola president Donald Keough met privately with the company's bottlers to reveal their plan. The bottlers gave them a standing ovation. The next morning, Goizueta walked into a press conference at Lincoln Center in New York City, stood in front of the cameras, and announced that Coca-Cola was changing its formula for the first time in 99 years. Some may choose to call this the boldest single marketing move in the history of packaged goods business, he said. He was not wrong about that part. So here's the thing. That press conference where he made that announcement, it didn't go very well. Pepsi had gotten wind of the announcement in advance and spent the night before feeding hostile questions to journalists. By the time Goizueta took the stage at Lincoln Center, the room was already loaded. Reporters noted immediately that the new formula tasted sweeter, more like Pepsi. Goizueta described it as smoother, rounder, yet bolder, a more harmonious flavor. The press heard something simpler. Coca-Cola, in their ears, just admitted that Pepsi was right. Within days, the phone started ringing in Atlanta. Within weeks, they were ringing so constantly that Coca-Cola set up a dedicated hotline and hired extra staff to answer it. At the peak, the company was fielding about 8,000 calls a day. 40,000 complaint letters arrived, including one addressed simply to Chief Dodo, the Coca-Cola Company. In Seattle, cases of new Coke were dumped publicly into the sewers. In Texas, a man spent $1,000 stockpiling the original formula like it was going out of style, which technically it was. Psychiatrists were being quoted in newspapers about consumer grief. A group called the Old Cola Drinkers of America formed almost overnight and threatened a class action lawsuit. New Coke ads shown on the scoreboard at the Houston Astrodome were booed. Roger Enrico, who was Pepsi's CEO, declared a company holiday the day after that press conference. And then he took out full-page ads in major newspapers calling it the day Pepsi won the Cola Wars. Now, here is where the story starts to get interesting. Here are some facts that provide some different perspectives on how and why all of this happened. Because while all of this was happening publicly, a few things were also happening quietly behind the scenes. Coca-Cola's internal tracking showed that consumer preference for new Coke was already declining. It had tested at 53% in blind tastings before the launch. By July 1985, just 2 months in, that number had dropped to 40%. The backlash wasn't softening, it was hardening. And you know what? Coca-Cola was moving pretty fast. Unusually fast for a company that had spent 2 years and $4 million arriving at the decision it was now so quickly deciding to reverse. The same organization that had conducted 200,000 taste tests before changing the formula was preparing to change it back in less time than it takes most companies to approve a new logo. There is also the matter of the press coverage. Coca-Cola, yes, they'd lost millions in research and advertising cost. But the free media attention generated by the backlash and the reversal was estimated to be worth roughly 3 times the amount they spent developing the product. Every television network was covering it. Every newspaper was running it. The most recognized brand in the world was the topic of conversation at every kitchen table and every water cooler in America. And then there's the sweetener question. As I mentioned earlier, Goizueta had already switched Coca-Cola from cane sugar to high fructose corn syrup before any of this happened, quietly, without public announcement. When Classic Coke came back, some people swore it tasted slightly different than what they remembered. A theory began circulating that the entire new Coke episode had served as a very effective distraction from an ingredient change that had already been made and that nobody had been asked to approve. Now, none of this stuff that I'm talking about was proven. None of it was admitted. But the dots were there, and people were starting to connect them. The moment Coca-Cola lost control of the situation, it's probably not the moment the phone started ringing. It's the moment they realized the phones weren't going to stop. On July 11th, 1985, 79 days after the most confident product launch in beverage history, Robert Goizueta and Donald Keough held another press conference. The tone was somewhat different this time. Keough stood at the microphone and said, "We did not understand the deep emotions of so many of our customers for Coca-Cola." He called it a wonderful American mystery. He said the passion people felt for the original formula was something you couldn't measure any more than you can measure love or pride or patriotism. It was a graceful thing to say, and he said it well. The news was so significant that television networks broke into regular daytime programming with special reports. The return of original Coca-Cola as Coca-Cola Classic led 2 network newscasts and made the front page of virtually every major newspaper in the country for free. Classic Coke came back, and the market responded immediately. Within months, it had reclaimed its position at the top of the sugar cola category, ahead of Pepsi, and a race it had been losing for the better part of 15 years. New Coke quietly settled into a 3% market share in its first year, was renamed Coke 2 in 1990, and was discontinued entirely in 2002. Something else you may not have realized? Every single can and bottle of Coca-Cola sold in America for the next 24 years carried the word classic on the label, not supposedly as a marketing choice, as a consequence. A word that only existed because of 79 days in 1985. Printed millions of times a day, every day, until 2009, when a company spokesman finally said the reason for keeping it had all but disappeared. So, something we like to do in bloopers episodes is to break down what happened and take a look at it. In this situation, there are actually some lingering questions that I'm going to let you decide. I told you at the top that most people agree on what happened, and we've just walked through it. The sliding market share, the taste test, the launch, the backlash, the reversal, the surge. That part isn't in dispute. The part that is still in dispute is the why. Was the formula that tested wrong from the start built on a sip test methodology that Malcolm Gladwell would later argue was flawed by design? Did Coca-Cola spend $4 million confirming a result that never reflected how people actually drink soda? Did the most powerful brand in the world mistake a loyalty crisis for a flavor problem and only found out the hard way? Or did somebody in Atlanta know exactly what they were doing? Did the fastest reversal in corporate history happen that fast because the exit had already been mapped out? Did the chaos conveniently bury a sweetener swap that had already happened? Did a company that lost millions in cost somehow walk away with 3 times that in free publicity a reinvigorated brand, and a Pepsi competitor that had just declared victory maybe a little too early. Donald Keough, Coca-Cola's president and the man who was standing at the microphone on July 11th, was asked about the conspiracy theory directly. He said, "Some cynics will say we planned the whole thing. The truth is we are not that dumb, and we are not that smart. Make of that what you will." I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business Bloopers, part of the Business Daily podcast lineup, where we look at how business really works and sometimes how it really doesn't. New episodes drop every weekday, with fun, full-length blooper stories like this on Fridays and quick-hit business history episodes the rest of the week. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the ride, please don't forget to leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And do you want to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language? Start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.